Jacksonville, I think, is clearly still the better team, which is interesting knowing that they have the same record. And, one little slip up more for Jacksonville or a lucky win for Kansas City, and Jacksonville could get the number one pick, which could turn out to be pretty beneficial because here's a team, I don't think they're as bad as their record shows. So maybe if they get one more game changing, pick number one or pick number two, you can still make that opportunity. But I think Jacksonville is closer to becoming relevant than Kansas City is.
And Justin Blackmon, throw everything else off the window, just alone, that receiver is coming into his own. It might just be one game, and he almost matched his season total going into this game with 237 yards receiving in this game. But just throw everything else off the window. Kansas City would do anything to get a receiver like Justin Blackmon, a young guy that can make plays. Dwayne Bowe was supposed to be that guy, but he has been anything since. Very inconsistent, can't catch the football, and hasn't gotten the deep plays that Kansas City would have liked. And it also starts up front at the quarterback position. Both of these teams have failed time and time again, but Jacksonville's an expansion franchise that will get things going. Not as fast as Houston, but let's not fail to mention that Jacksonville, just 10 years removed from a very close contest to being very close, in that AFC Championship game. They have been very close to the Super Bowl. They're just facing a very low streak right now. 1-9 speaks volumes, and another game-changing number one overall pick, Phil, as you mentioned, might really help Jacksonville, coming in the next few years. So another team that is really going hot as of late with a very, under-talented football team. Quickly over to Indianapolis. Now, this game was far from close, 59-24. New England tied a franchise record for points in this game, and Indianapolis seemed to be just the worst team up front. They could not make the plays that counted, but just you gotta love the fight and the grit of this team. And what to make of Indianapolis? They're 6-4 now, but even though after a big-time loss, I believe this team can rebound after all the troubles they've had this year.
Yeah, I feel that the Colts are almost in the same situation as the Bucs, where, making the playoffs, it's a good goal to have, and it's a very realistic goal. But, both these teams, Tampa Bay and Indianapolis, if they miss the playoffs, there is still a situation where you can deem it a successful season. Nobody expected, Tampa Bay to be where they're at, and nobody definitely expected, Indianapolis to be where they are. Obviously it took a thumping against New England, a team that would beat the Colts when they were, in their prime with Peyton Manning. So it's never it shouldn't hurt too bad to lose in New England because, frankly, a lot of people do. So it'll be interesting to see. It was a pretty big gap of victory. The Patriots putting up a 50 spot on them. Really, it just, you come out to see how they respond from that and, how they can do moving forward.
In Indianapolis, you got to give credit to a team that has really come into its own as of late. They're a very under-talented team, and it showed in this game. But Indianapolis, you made the comparison between Tampa Bay and Indianapolis. And in a sense, you might as well make a comparison between the AFC and the NFC. Same record, and the divisions are almost similar in a way. Houston just blowing the door out of that division, and Indianapolis trying to get into the postseason. But at 6-4, the Colts are on the inside trying to control their destiny, while Tampa Bay is on the outside looking in. Speaks volumes to a conference that is way ahead of the AFC. The NFC is just tough, strictly from all of these teams around the NFC. So many teams can get into that playoff picture. Meanwhile, in the AFC, you have the 6 teams, including the 2 wild card contenders, and outside of that, every other team in the AFC has a losing record at 4-6 or even worse. Speaks volumes of the NFC that is 1 to 2 games ahead of this very abysmal conference. So for Indianapolis, in a sense, they might be able to get in the playoffs by default, and I don't see them going far. But when you're in, anything can happen, and certainly they've gotten the correct bounces throughout this entire year.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to look at it is, the Colts and the Bucs are in the exact same situation in different conferences. I think Indianapolis might have a slightly better chance of getting in the playoffs due to the fact that, the Bucs do play in a tough division. They have the Falcons, that are playing as good as they are, and then you have the Saints doing everything they can at this point. Almost every game is a playoff game. But, both these teams, their odds are against them, but if either team made it, I wouldn't be surprised.
Reading off the remaining schedule for Indianapolis, just next 3 games, if they on paper play like they should, home game against Buffalo, they should be able to put up a win there, and then on the road against Detroit, might be a tough battle, between the Lions and the Colts there, but then they have to face the Titans. It was a very thrilling game as well for, the Indianapolis Colts there with Tennessee. Just post up 9 wins, and this team will probably be set and on their way into the postseason. And the same might be the case, but I just don't believe in the hype over in Dallas. Now, overtime speaks volumes to a team that was down 13-0 and able to come back and win in that game. But we're speaking about a team like the Browns. And for the first time in all of the 2011 season, Dallas is posting a 2-game winning streak. They actually have a winning streak going. But right now at 500, the schedule gets a little tougher, and Cleveland is a very easy opponent. Now, they should have been able to blow this team out of the water. But what to make of a team now at 500 that in a way seems to be getting their niche? They beat the Eagles pretty impressively, and then coming up at home, beating the Browns in a must-win game to keep their playoff hopes alive.
Well, I feel the Cowboys are right on schedule with what they normally do. They hit a point in the season, where everything seems lost, and then they hit another point where it's, maybe if things fall their way, I don't let it fool me. It hasn't fooled me for a few years. This team doesn't make the playoffs. There's just more complete teams out there. The Eagles beat the Browns by 1 earlier in the year, but, that game was based off of our mistakes, but to go to overtime against Cleveland in a game where you pulled out all the stops, you threw it all over the yard, it just seemed like a shootout. If this was a game they played against the Ravens that they lost a close one in, that'd be different. But, they might be 500, but I don't see it. I don't see this team making the playoffs.
They sneak their way into 500, so I just don't see this team even being able to keep that 500 record. As we mentioned, Dallas has really struggled throughout the remaining few weeks, and they've gotten it going where the offense posts up the big-time numbers but doesn't get the points. They're top 10 in yardage offensively and defensively but doesn't get the points to match what they're doing on offense. And just the next few weeks just speaks volumes of a team that is barely 500 right now. They're home against Washington, and then they have to face the Philadelphia Eagles before on the road against the Browns. They still have the Steelers to play again, a hot New Orleans team in Week 16 that still could be in the playoff hunt there, and then on the road against the Redskins. This is a team that faces a lot of division rivals. Those games can go either way. Dallas is not out of it yet, but just getting to 500 might be very extremely tough. And for a team that really offensively is extremely abysmal, and for a team that, for a league that offensively you need to score points to win, I don't see Dallas making it. And obviously, if there's any team in the NFC East, I would still put my money on the Washington Redskins to being able to knock off those Dallas Cowboys. If there's any other team in the NFC East that could make it, Phil, I believe you'd go with Dallas as well. 500 right now, but how many of those games do you even think they could win coming down the stretch? And are they a team that maybe could knock off a playoff team or two coming down the final few weeks?
This team would really have to get hot down the stretch to make the playoffs. And you mentioned it earlier, this is the first time that they've had a win streak of more than one game. So, being hot and stringing wins together, in a row has always been hard for them. This year anyway. And, the past couple of years, they don't go on, these crazy win streaks that they have, in years past. So, really, they would have to change everything about themselves to even have a chance to get in the playoffs at this rate.
And there's a different scenario over in Denver as well. We'll go real quickly into this Broncos team that right now is catching a niche with their future Hall of Fame quarterback in Peyton Manning. Now, I have this team as perhaps a vibe for the second seed in the AFC. They have that division set, just showing this game that San Diego struggled the entire game. If it weren't for offensively not being able to close out this game, it probably would have been a lot farther than it really was. But, offensively for Denver, they can match up with any team in the National Football League. And not to mention, San Diego is defensively a more dominant team. They're top 10 in that category. Believe it or not, they're one of the best defensive teams in the league. It's just offensively, they're extremely pathetic. So for Denver in this game, it speaks volumes of the entire year just really catching their niche. Now, their record does not speak of how they played as of late. Is Denver a team to look out for in the AFC, as you have the Denver Broncos and the Pittsburgh Steelers being the two teams that are getting hot as of late? Denver, a very dominant team. Are they a team that could make their way into the Super Bowl, perhaps? If they can get things going and get that second seed.
Yeah, I think in the next couple of weeks we're really going to see how all these teams shape out. I think the contenders and pretenders are really going to show themselves here. This is right around the time, some teams that, kind of like the Cowboys, they'll hit 500 and that's about as good as they get because all these other teams, buckle down. It's almost like in college football, you might be afforded to lose a little bit early, but, people know regardless of your record, you want to keep winning because you want the momentum to get in there. I don't have a statistic on this, but I think there is less upsets later in the year than early in the year because, later on, teams know what are at stakes and the better teams find ways to win, which is why I think when most teams make the playoffs, it is because they deserve them. Very rarely do you get, lucky playoff berths other than teams, like Seattle getting 7-9 and making it in with their weak division. But overall, teams make the playoffs because they deserve it. So we'll really see in the next couple of weeks what teams deserve it.
And right now, if the playoffs were to start today, it would be Houston far and away that number one spot in the AFC, and Denver right now, the number 3 seed, but trying to get into the number 2 spot. It'll be very interesting making their way into the postseason. If Denver plays a team like the Patriots or the Houston Texans in their house, how they'd be able to face off against those two teams. Now, we're wrapping up here on the NFL goal line, and obviously it's been a very exciting hour on, NFL goal line, and we are getting into our final part of the show here. But real quick, Monday Night Football matchup between the Niners and the Bears. We'll give you all the updates here on this matchup. Phil, what do you have?
Well, looking into this game, I expected there'd be a lot more game breaks and a lot more things I need to tell you guys, but it's still, the same blowout that it's been. 30-7 now. They added a David Akers field goal. I wish there was more to report here, but it's been all Niners all the time.
And obviously, the San Francisco 49ers, I had them for the past couple weeks. They've been just pushed around recently, and the Rams really gave them some big-time struggles there. And then the Vikings and the Giants, their 2 losses, those were huge defeats. And I did not see the Niners against as good of a team as the Bears. Going into this game, 30-7 right now, this has just been a blowout performance by Harbaugh. Give the hats off to a team that is trying to get, a first-round bye in the playoff hunt over there in the NFC and in a very dominant conference. I don't want to give all my betting money on a team like San Francisco that's been so inconsistent. But, Phil, would you have San Francisco as being a number 2 team, and is this a contender or a pretender when we don't even know what their starting quarterback, and how good he'll play, as he's just sitting on the sideline right now?
Oh, they're definitely contenders. The scariest thing, you're watching them putting up 30 points, against what most people were trying to say a few weeks ago was the best defense ever. And here's where it gets really scary. They're doing it tonight with a backup quarterback. So, you look at this team, they're stacked at every position. They went out in free agency and they signed all these guys and they re-signed some of their own talent. Here's a team that I think is going to be good and they're going to be good for a very long time.
And call me a hater, but I just don't believe the Niners' magic right now, as offensively, their starting line cannot match up with the elite defensive lines in the National Football League, and this Niners receiving core is just a question mark week in and week out. Now, they do have talent on the outside, but this team outside of this game is not really putting up the big-time numbers that you would see out of a team like in the NFC. Now, the Bears are up and down, but in that NFC, the Falcons can go up and down the field against any team in the league, and it's just overall in the NFC against teams that can really pass the football. If the Packers make it, they'll be hot as well. So just right now for San Francisco, they can get pushed around, But Phil, I just don't believe